very hard to know what the theme of this budget is going to be. And I'm tempted to quote Justice Lee on this, and I thank him very much for the word omnishambles. I think that has summed up pretty well in a more eloquent way than cluster.
Right.
But what do you really think, Nikki?
The lead up to the budget. Now, a lot of it has not been the government's fault, with, you know, international events, Middle East, etc., etc.
And domestic issues.
And domestic, awful, terrible things happening. But a lot of it has been. There have been things that have happened that the government should have handled a whole lot better, but instead allowed them to drag on for days and days.
You mean in the budget space, or do you mean things like immigration that have...
I mean things like immigration, right. I mean things like the rally and, you know, things that happened that really weren't entirely within their control, except in the handling of them.
Yeah, and look, we'll get to some of those issues, but for the Treasurer's part, is it because he's not had the clear air, is that what you're saying? Or do you think his own message about the budget's been a problem?
I think he hasn't had the clear air. And then we've had, you know, a few surprising things being dropped out there that, you know, don't seem to fit in with what the actual message is supposed to be. And this is the budget that is going to be most critical to the government's fortunes. There may or may not be another budget before the election, but this is the one that will decide whether or not they hang on to majority government.
No pressure.
At the next election. But if it's got to hang together, and there is no margin for error in this budget. It's got to be 100% right, because if for any reason it leads to an increase in interest rates, if they haven't got the setting rights, then they will wear it.
Annabelle, omnishambles?
No, I think omnishambles. I mean, I take your point about the climate of events surrounding the budget. I mean, what we're talking about here is the actual document itself and whether it makes sense, because budgets are sort of stories, aren't they, that governments tell electorates about where their priorities are. And this one is so weird because it is a pre-election budget where the government has no ability to do what they normally do in pre-election governments, budgets, which is
shovel out.
I love you and here's why, and here's how many billions of dollars reasons why. Because if there's a sort of a subtext to this budget, it's kind of like, what does this button do? Because, you know, all of the things that governments would normally want to do at this stage of the cycle are catastrophic for the reasons of contributing to inflation, which makes life worse for Australians. So essentially, it's a collection of undertakings that are designed to not make certain things happen. Well, and that is a pretty tricky one.
The Treasurer, though, Jacob, says that there will be cost of living relief but downward pressure on inflation. There will be substantial investments but spending restraint. Is it possible to have the cake and eat it too?
No. And there's probably nothing more miserable than to be a Treasurer who's ambitious, socially progressive, ahead of an election, and you're not allowed to splurge. You know, that's a hard place. And he's there partly because of his previous budgets. This is his third. This is the third budget in a row where we're looking at this juggle between, you know, he portrays it as trying to find a balance between not doing austerity, which I don't think anyone sensible is calling for, or spending like mad. He's going to sell this as, I'm down the middle, I'm neutral. Now that sounds good, but in a high inflation environment, which we're still in, that may not be actually what's needed. We should be probably running much bigger surpluses.
So you think austerity? Let's go.
Austerity is different.
Shut down some stuff.
No, but you could have done, for instance, you could have delayed those tax cuts and not spent the money for a year. That would have taken weight out of the economy. And people one of the investment banks this week calculated those tax cuts are worth more than a percentage point on the interest rate that everyone pays.
Sure, but they'd get absolutely smashed for that.
It's political nightmare, but this is the misery I'm talking about when you're this Treasurer who wants to be loved, but you can't do anything about it.
That would be very courageous, Treasurer.